All right, get ready, because today we're going deep on something kind of unexpected. We're diving into swimming, but here's the twist. Our source material is an IELTS prep podcast. You might be thinking, wait, what? But stick with me here. Even if you're not prepping for an English exam anytime soon, this podcast has some hidden gems about communication that can help anyone, really. Anyone can learn to be a more effective communicator.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of finding insights about communication in the most random spots. And, when you think about it, the IELTS speaking exam, it's all about explaining your thoughts and ideas clearly and in a way that people want to listen to, which are skills we all need, right? Like in everyday life.
Exactly.
Mm.
Okay, so let's jump into some questions and answers from the podcast. They start off with pretty basic ones like, do you like swimming? And did you learn to swim as a child? You might think those are simple.
Yeah.
But the podcast really stresses going beyond just yes or no, like weave in some personal details to make it more interesting, like a story.
Yeah, that's where the power of storytelling comes in. Even in like normal everyday conversations, adding those little personal touches can make a huge difference. Think about it. Our brains just light up when we hear stories. When someone shares something personal, it helps us connect with them, on a deeper level. And we remember what they said better.
That's so true. I remember when they gave the model answer for, did you learn to swim as a child?
Mm-hmm.
The way they talked about being 6 years old and feeling nervous and then finally getting freestyle and breaststroke. It took me right back to my own swimming lessons when I was a kid.
Right. And that's the magic of details. They create these vivid images in the listener's mind. Your story comes to life. Instead of just saying, I learned to swim when I was a kid, you're painting a picture with words. You're inviting the other person to relive those memories with you.
I'm totally seeing how even talking about swimming can teach us a lot about communicating better. So the podcast also gets into how to structure your answers well, especially with open-ended questions. They use the example, how often do you go swimming, to show this.
Right, and that's where we can learn from how they contrast different situations or time periods, to add depth to their answer. In the podcast, they mention how their swimming habits change with the seasons. More swimming in summer, obviously, and then more indoor stuff when it's colder. This way, you're not only giving a full answer, but you're making it more interesting for the person listening, too.
You're right. And they even suggest going a step further by adding like a wish or a challenge to your response. Something like, I wish I could swim more often, but my schedule is crazy right now.
Yeah.
It adds a little personality, shows you've thought about it.
Yeah, it's subtle, but it works. You reveal a bit more about yourself and your goals. It builds a better connection with whoever you're talking to. And you can use this anywhere, not just in formal settings like exams. Try it in everyday chats to make your conversations more memorable and fun.
Love that. So we're not just learning how to pass a test, we're learning to be better communicators all around.
Okay, one question that stood out to me was, is swimming popular in your country? It seems simple, but it's easy to start making generalizations, right?
Yeah, and that's where the podcast emphasizes giving a balanced view. They talk about how swimming's popular in coastal areas of India, but then they acknowledge that it might not be so common in landlocked places, because there might not be as many pools or beaches.
It's a good reminder that even when we think we're stating the obvious, we should consider different perspectives and not make blanket statements. Definitely something I'll be paying more attention to in my own conversations. All right, let's move on to a question I think a lot of us can relate to. Would you like to learn any other water sports?
I know I've always been curious about surfing.
And that's where enthusiasm is key. The podcast encourages you to not just say you're interested, but to let your passion come through.
Yeah, they use the example of someone who's fascinated by surfing. They talk about the skill and balance it takes. They even mentioned being inspired by a documentary about pro surfers.
Exactly. It's about going beyond just yes. Give reasons why you're interested, share a personal connection to the topic, maybe even hint at your future plans, It creates a much more engaging story and shows you're really into the conversation.
It's like you're letting the listener peek into what makes you tick. It's funny. I never thought I'd get communication tips from an IELTS prep podcast. But this deep dive is full of surprises.
Right. It shows you can find good advice anywhere. And the best part, these techniques aren't just for tests. They can help you connect with people better in any conversation.
Totally. Whether you're talking with a friend, giving a presentation at work, or even just making small talk at a party, these storytelling tricks can really help.
Speaking of making things better, one thing the IELTS podcast mentions is using different tenses when you speak. You might be thinking, isn't that just grammar? But they're talking about something deeper.
You mean like how using different tenses can actually make your stories more exciting and interesting.
Exactly. Instead of just stating facts in the present tense, try weaving in past experiences, how you feel now, even your hopes for the future, to create a richer story. Instead of saying, I enjoy swimming, you could say, I used to be terrified of the water, but I took lessons last year, and now I love swimming.
Wow, that does make it so much more vivid. You're not just giving information, you're sharing a whole journey.
Right, and that's what makes it stick. The podcast also talks about speaking naturally and smoothly, which can be tough, especially when you're nervous, like during a test. But the main thing is you don't have to sound perfect or like a robot.
It's about being yourself and letting your personality show.
Exactly. It's those little imperfections, like hesitating or correcting yourself, that make us human and relatable. And that brings me to another point they make. Practicing your speaking skills, they suggest recording yourself to see where you can improve. I know that can be scary for some people.
Oh, for sure. Hearing your own voice can be a little awkward, but I have to say, it's super helpful for catching things like filler words or places where your pronunciation could be clearer.
Yeah, it's like a mirror for your speech. You can see and hear yourself differently. The more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you will become. Another thing the IELTS podcast gets into is vocabulary.
Ah, yes, the power of words. I remember them talking about using words that are specific and descriptive instead of just general terms.
Right. It's about painting a picture with your words and making the listener feel something. For example, instead of, I like swimming in the ocean, you could say, I love the feeling of weightlessness as I float in the vast ocean with the salty water all around me.
That's beautiful. It's like you can almost feel the ocean breeze and hear the waves.
Exactly. We want to take the listener into our world through language.
So even though this podcast is for people studying for an English exam, what we're learning applies to anyone who wants to communicate better.
Definitely. It's about thinking about how we structure our sentences, choosing our words carefully, and adding personal details and feelings to our speech.
And remember that trick of adding a wish or a challenge to your answers. I think that's brilliant for making any conversation more interesting and personal.
It's a subtle way to invite the other person to learn more about you and what you want to achieve. It can lead to a much more meaningful conversation.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to go back to that question about learning other water sports. It got me thinking, what water activity, besides swimming, have you always kind of wondered about? Is there something you've always wanted to try but just haven't, taken the plunge? Maybe surfing, like they talked about in the IELTS podcast, or something even more adventurous, like scuba diving or whitewater rafting?
It's funny how often we have these things we want to do, but then fear or self-doubt holds us back. What's stopping you from exploring those deeper waters?
Maybe it's not having enough time. Or maybe it's fear of the unknown. Or maybe we just haven't found the right chance or the right people to do it with.
There's that saying, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. Sometimes we just need a little push to try something new and challenging.
So true. And thinking back to all those communication tips we've been talking about, maybe just telling someone about that thing you want to try is a good first step. Imagine saying to a friend, hey, I've always wanted to try kayaking, but I'm kind of nervous to go alone. Want to take a class with me?
That's a perfect example of using those communication skills, not just to express yourself, but to maybe open up new possibilities. Who knows, maybe that friend's been wanting to try kayaking too, but they've also been hesitant.
It's amazing how just talking can lead to such cool adventures. And even if that friend isn't into kayaking, just saying it out loud might give you the confidence to just go for it yourself.
Sometimes all it takes is to say your dreams out loud, to make them feel more real, more possible. And remember, even the best swimmers had to start somewhere. Everyone was a beginner once, figuring out those first strokes.
It's good to remember that it's okay to be a beginner, to enjoy the learning process and not be afraid to mess up along the way. I mean, those mistakes are how we learn, right?
For sure. And who knows, maybe those fumbles and splashes will become stories you can tell others and inspire them to try new things too.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into swimming and communication, we want to leave you with this. What water activity are you going to add to your bucket list? And what can you do today to make that dream happen? Don't let fear or self-doubt hold you back. Dive in, embrace the challenge, and let your communication skills be your guide.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those conversations going.